And so we at EEC had to create a plan, and we asked you to do the same. And we released minimum health and safety requirements and created new templates and transactions and trainings, and worked as fast as we could to be able to reopen childcare quickly, and with all of the strategies we knew would be necessary to prevent COVID transmission when we did. We engaged with you as much as we could, and we tried to be as responsive to your feedback along the way, knowing that this was everyone, including our staff's, first time reopening childcare during a pandemic, and that we were all grappling with our own personal realities as well as professional ones. But I have to say, the response I saw from the field, the passion, the determination, it has just absolutely reinforced my belief that we will be able to not only survive, but rebuild and be better for it on the other side of this. I've been reflecting a lot about my takeaways of where we are and where we are headed as we look into the year ahead. I, having just finished my first year in this role, was not expecting to be at this reflection point at this moment. But I just have to say that our field is really amazing. And I know that I read every incident report that comes in since June 22nd, when the first program reopened. And I have seen all of you grappling and making good choices, hard, difficult choices, but the right choices to prioritize health and safety of our communities, of our children and our families, and dealing with these choices in the face of very difficult circumstances. It just reinforces my belief that when there is a plan in place, your reaction time, your decisiveness, your confidence is clear and encouraging. And because of that, we have good news for the Commonwealth. And the childcare can open and stay open and be available to families and children who need it. As we now begin to settle into the year ahead, we are focusing on supporting childcare to do the continuous safe operations and supporting our communities in the year ahead to make sure they have the resources they need to continue making sure families and children remain safe. Did you know that almost 75% of childcare programs have reopened and have indicated their intention to continue serving children and families this year? Every single one of them has a COVID operation plan in place to prevent the spread of COVID. And the plan is focused on from the beginning, and it will be more important as we go through the fall and winter to make sure we are relying on our expertise in the field and our plans to keep ourselves safe. EEC's own plan, our strategic action plan, if you recall, was approved by our board on the day the Commonwealth entered the state of emergency. But it really does continue to be an important touchstone for us as we look ahead and work on rebuilding in a place that can put us in a position of strength as we look forward. As many of you may remember from the last board meeting, I did promise the board, and we have been diligently working over the last month to update that plan and reflect the new changes and the landscape and the reality that we've been grappling with as we've navigated the last 6 months. At this point, it has been updated to reflect the impact of COVID, and we'll be providing the board with it at the next meeting. A plan is really the foundation, but for our field, it also is the scaffolding to support us to keep going. On the ground, supports like coordinated family and community engagement centers, mental health consultation, professional development centers are here to support families and the programs that serve them, and to make sure they have the access the Commonwealth needs. We've also used that to create the playbook to pull together information childcare programs need during COVID, including minimum requirements, the latest on changes and flexibilities that we've been able to provide at EEC, and additional resources to support operations during this time. We created expedited expansion policies for our licensed programs to serve more children during this new instructional approach from school districts where remote learning has caused new needs for families and children. We created a new exemption process to allow remote learning to support and exist without undermining the work of licensed providers. But here's the bottom line. As we create all of this, what we know is we're in this together. Whether it's childcare programs, schools, children, educator, our grantees who are supporting families and children, or our communities, it is going to take all of us bounding together and collaborating and partnering to make sure we can come out of this stronger. We've also tried to set the stage for a more innovative, resilient, and equitable future for children in this state. Our strategic plan lays the foundation for some of that, but what does that actually mean for the year ahead? It means as we return to this strategic action plan that was informed by all of you, by trips across the Commonwealth, listening and understanding what issues we were struggling with, that we need to make sure we're staying true to that vision and that the decisions we make on a daily basis lead us closer to a bigger reality and a better reality for our field. Our challenge ahead is not only to rebuild childcare, but to rebuild it with a foundation and a structure that allows us to be stronger for the future. The educator workforce has become a central component of the strategic plan, and we must continue to focus on strengthening it. For those of you who remember how our strategic action plan was laid out, we had the children and families as the core of our work, educators and program as a key stakeholder audience that EEC needed to work with, and systems that EEC runs to make sure that we are focused on that customer and the Commonwealth needs as we look ahead. The crisis has been hard on our educator workforce. And programs are struggling to find the great educators to fill their programs and be able to serve children. Whether that be a teacher or a teacher assistant in a group and school age program, whether that be a family childcare assistant, as we look ahead. But we know that those of you who continue to be dedicated to this field are struggling to stay in the field you love, struggling to stay with the work you love, and serving the children and families you've come to love over the years. This is why our choices now really reinforce the need for the educator credentialing framework, something that helps EEC make sure that as we are recruiting and sustaining that workforce that we need so desperately during this time, that we are validating the increasing expertise through stackable qualifications that allow you to stay and thrive in this field that you've dedicated so much time to. When we talk about programs and the programs we serve, want to make sure that we're recognizing that the model of funding for these programs that has focused on attendance each day presents significant challenges right now. And we are committed, as we have been through the recovery, to working collaboratively with the field to update this model. We know we need a backbone of childcare program quality, and we are still committed to ensuring that the QRIS 2.0 is here to help us operationalize that backbone. But as we rebuild and increase program capacity, we need to communicate clearly and effectively that the remarkable work that childcare educators are doing to create and sustain programs that are high quality and put children on track for success in school and beyond. And we need a framework to do that. So as we look to recover, that we are in a place of strength and consistently an asset to communities that can be communicated and collaborated with. But we can't do any of this alone. We need our communities to be with us. Families are relying on childcare to be there when they need the work, when they need to go to work, to school, and for many other reasons. We also know that there will be ongoing shifts in family needs and resources as we live through the year ahead. Some parents and guardians will go back to work in person, others will work from home, others may have lost their job and are searching for their next profession. Schools will be in person and remote and hybrid, and they'll be grappling with how to keep their environment safe as well. And it will be important for us to be there in deep partnership between childcare and K-12 and the communities grappling to serve and accommodate families. That is why I am working closely with EOE and DESE and Commissioner Riley to ensure that all of our departments are aligned. These are all partnerships that existed before, but now we need them more than ever. And our capacity to help you grow them deeper and stronger and more responsive to communities is really critical as we look to the needs of our families ahead. And families need reliable, affordable, and equitable access to programming, which is why we have worked to look at our subsidy structures, create temporary policies that help provide as much flexibility as we can to support families and programs during this time. We've eliminated any need for unnecessary documentation. We provided an extended job search period to empower parents to have care while they're looking for their next career. And we've removed attendance requirements in order to make sure that our children who need to stay home can do so, particularly if they're sick or not feeling well. But we need to recommit to strengthening our system of childcare that relies on us as a state. This includes reorganizing regulations and policies as we committed to in the spring, making sure that our technology systems are easier to access and more responsive to you, and creating a staffing structure to support the field and execute the vision and goals. Through the emergency closure and the reopening, we maintain the goal to improve system-level structures and processes and practices. And many of you continue to work with us to make sure that we can be a model for the broader childcare community of how a state agency can form in collaboration and in response to the needs of the field. But we can never forget the heart of the work we do, children and families. Now more than ever, as the environment in which we provide care and education to children is changing, we need to make sure we're keeping children on track for success, which is why we will continue over the course of the year to remain focused on the outcomes that we need for children and families to achieve between birth and third grade, and ensure that we are keeping children on a path, particularly during this incredibly tumultuous year ahead, to make sure that we are supporting them to achieve the greatness we know they can, and on track to third grade success and beyond. Though health and safety have to continue to be top of mind, we can never forget about the work of early educator and early education and care community, and that we need to provide the care and education and resources needed for children to thrive in school and in life. And we know that that takes not only your work with children, but the support for families that is so critical to their success. Finally, I want to say thank you. I cannot wait for the time when I can safely walk through your programs again and see the incredible work you're doing and the education and care you're providing. Until then, please keep up the great work. Keep washing your hands, keep wearing your masks. We are going through this together, and we know we are going to need to be better for it. I know before I started answering a few questions, I just wanted to comment on the new materials we released. The materials we released over the last few weeks were really trying to be responsive to the work you need ahead, not just documents and Word documents for you to follow, but strategies to share that we've heard from the field throughout our time, throughout our COVID time. And so I want to make sure you all know that these will continue to iterate and evolve, and we will continue to make sure that we have the resources you need to be able to be successful. I know we have a few questions on the question and answer, so if you can, Eli, if you'll be able to take the questions, we'll be able to answer some of them.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think the first question, there are a lot of questions about the health attestation and sort of the process for screening and bringing children in childcare space. And so I wondered if you could provide some clarification, especially addressing the question around children who are arriving to a program from in-person learning in a school. Do they still need to complete a parent health attestation? And then also the difference between the health attestation and the symptom screen and kind of how those work together.
Yes, so we want to make sure you know that there is that the health attestation and the screening have two different purposes. So while we do not require you use our forms or our printouts, or you can do it in a way that works best for your program, it is important that you maintain a process that does these two purposes. The health screening is a visual screen of the educator to the child to make sure that there are no apparent symptoms or reason to believe this child might be need to be quarantined. The parent health attestation attests of what has happened since the last time that child has been in childcare. So again, the visual screen is about your visual screen of that child. The health attestation is about the parents attesting to the fact that there's no known exposure since the last time. We have heard a lot of different responses from you of ways that you've been engaging with parents and understanding how you can keep your environment safe through questions. So some of the questions we've added to the health attestation form are working to be responsive to the field. You do not need to use every question. We want you to make sure that you know that there is no risk of exposure along the way. In response to the question around what happens if you are receiving a child midday from a parent, if the parent isn't there, you still need to have the parent complete a health attestation form when the child leaves the house in the morning. You still need to be able to get the attestation from the parent that ensures that the child has not been exposed or been in any potential exposure experiences since the time when you last saw the child. Again, it can be a piece of paper attestation in the child's bag that they hand to the program upon arrival, or it can be online if you have the capacity to set that up. Every child still needs a health attestation and a visual screen, the visual symptom screen when they arrive at the program, to make sure that they are symptom-free and that you know of where the child has been and any potential exposure since the last time they've been in childcare. Again, you don't have to ask our questions on the health attestation form from the parent, and you can add your own and do what you need to get the information you need to keep your environment safe. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Commissioner. There are questions about the gloves and the sanitizer and the supplies that are being distributed through the regional offices for reopening. Can you speak to how long those supplies will last, or anything about the available distributions?
So at this point, the regional offices are well stocked with PPE and continue to distribute to providers as needed. If you have not been able to pick up your supplies, I know some regional offices have been able to arrange for drop-offs if you are far away from the regional office, or be able to schedule after-hours pickups or coordinated pickups. We know the current process of going through our regional offices isn't sustainable for the long term, though, and so we are working to find an alternative solution that wouldn't require you to visit your regional offices or our licensors to detract from their important work to deliver PPE. But in the meantime, we have plenty of supplies at the regional offices, and until we find that other solution, we want to make sure that you have that resource and can continue operating safely. If there's any concern about amount that you've received, please call your regional office. They should have plenty, and we are refilling consistently to make sure that they can help you launch operations for the year.
Thank you. There are questions about the partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and about the executive order that the governor signed recently. Can you share an overview of what that's about, please?
Yeah. What we should know about the executive order is that we've launched resources to achieve three goals. One, we knew that our programs to adequately partner with our providers with our school districts, needed to be able to serve children who were in hybrid or virtual learning models. And so the executive order allows us to be able to, our providers to serve children while they're in school attendance, during the school day. Previously, our statute does not allow that to happen. And so the executive order helps us override that part and make sure that our licensed providers are able to partner with their communities in being able to serve children who are attending school in a virtual or hybrid learning model. The second thing this executive order does is make sure that those communities that don't have enough licensed programs have another alternative pathway to make sure their families can be safe if they have to return to work in person, or if they are seeking non-parental support. These are targeted to providers who don't provide childcare in the after school or out of school time, and are only seeking to serve this 1 year need for families around hybrid and virtual learning. This is a local exemption process that the local municipality will help approve so that a program can apply for an EEC exemption to serve children during the school day while they are enrolled in school and receiving virtual learning. The third thing that this executive order does is helps us define many, many questions we were getting on parent supervised learning and what does it look like to collaborate with your neighbors. So we tried to define that for parents, give you some parameters, and make sure that parents weren't stepping into areas where they were needing an exemption or a license, and we're not going to inadvertently be out of sync with the state regulations. We know that state regulations are hard for parents to look at when it isn't what they do all day for a profession. And so making sure that parents had a clear definition and able to really help foster the kind of learning and collaboration they needed in their neighborhoods. I want to make it clear that part of our goal here was to make sure that our licensed programs were in a position to partner with their communities. And so we expect and intend that our communities, as we've worked with municipalities, are able to work with their licensed providers, bring them to the table, and keep them at the forefront as we're looking to solve these very local problems. We know that families are reliant on our safe oversight of our licensed programs to make sure that their children can be safe and cared for while they are receiving instructional support virtually from their school. And so the partnership we've created with DESE is such that we've been able to make sure that districts and municipalities know that our licensed providers can have expedited licensing. If you have a rec center or an additional space that you intend to use for virtual learning support for working families, we want to make sure that you're using our licensed providers as much as possible to help fill that role. We've expedited processes for them to license new spaces, for them to ensure that they can get staffed up quickly. And we do have some resources to help collaborate at the local level if that is needed. But making sure that, that our providers could play that role and that we were helping our communities bring them to the table in a constructive partnership. For those communities where that isn't sufficient, and we knew that supply and demand of childcare before COVID wasn't sufficient to meet all families' needs. As we move forward, we know that communities are having to create creative collaborations on the ground, and we wanted to give pathways for communities to be able to foster what they needed along the way. I'm hopeful that we'll see this as it just launched. We're just starting to see the fruition of this. And so while I don't have, we don't have all numbers and communities, we know that many communities have reached out and are working together with their providers and making sure that they have the resources they need as we move forward. We will continue to answer questions. Your licensors, if you're a childcare program, should have the information now to be able to access the policies you need, make sure that your transactions are completed quickly, and making sure we're here to support you along the way.
Thank you, Commissioner. There is a question about children and kind of balancing health and safety and the needs to wear masks and social distancing with what this participant calls a child's job, which is to socialize and be kids, and how to kind of support children with interactions and conflict resolutions and some of the other things that they learn in early childhood. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I cannot sympathize enough of how we are going to grapple with the year ahead and the impact that we know every student, every learner, and every family is grappling with. I think, as I said, my experience in the classroom is forefront of in my mind right now as we think about how you design your day, how you design your activities to be able to foster the kind of learning and socialization we know children need. I want to be clear again that we are not coming around and trying to measure children's distance and penalize you for children being 4.5 feet apart, but really thinking about how you organize your day to still allow those really vital social interactions, both between adults and children and between children and children as we move forward. I think of things like circle time, where activities might include pulling your hands apart and doing standing up activities, looking at making sure that there are, if you have centers in your home or facility, that you are limiting the number of children in each center at a time, not to isolate them, but to make sure that you don't have centers that have 5 or 6 children in close proximity to each other. Those kind of questions really, those kind of activities really help balance the expertise of what children need every day to thrive, and what our environments need to make sure that COVID does not get transmitted in our centers and homes. And so making sure that you think about ways that you can structure your classrooms and your homes in an with an environment that allows for those kind of interactions, but doesn't encourage children and families to come too close together in a way that if you do find out there is a potential exposure, we aren't putting every other child at risk. We are minimizing the risk of transmission across children. So I think all the time of what I would be doing, thinking about lunchtime where children normally I would ask for 6 or 8 children at a table to be able to talk together. And now thinking about how you maybe have 3 or 4 children at a table where you can spread out and make sure you can still have those valuable lunchtime conversations where you learn a lot from kids, but also that you can make sure that they are not touching each other or in close proximity. I think things like washing hands are things we've always done in childcare. We know how to teach children to wash their hands. We just need to do so now more often and remind them, not from a place of fear and deficit, but of a place of strength and health, that these are ways that we keep ourselves, our friends, and our environments healthy during this time. I think that's really critical as we move forward. And I know how hard, I don't know because I am not doing the hard work all of you are every day. But I know that it's hard to think and scaffold your classrooms under normal times. And I can't imagine how difficult the decisions you're making every day. But I also know that the training, the experience, and the professionalism that all of our field is bringing to our interactions every day can make sure that we can both have structured play, structured socialization for children, and make sure they're learning and abiding by the healthy habits we need them to this year to prevent transmission.
Thank you, Commissioner. There are questions about whether programs can expect grants or funding or other sustainability supports.
Yep. We're working closely with the legislature. As all of you know, FY21 budget is very much still in discussion, both at the state and federal levels. And so we continue to work with the legislature and the governor's office and all of our stakeholders who are making these critical budget decisions to ensure that they know the needs of providers in ways that we can have the resources we need to be able to accommodate the year ahead. I will say, as far as I understand, those budget conversations are still very much actively in play, and we will expect to hear more about them later in the fall as the school year gets underway.
Thank you. There is a question about QRIS, the Quality Rating Improvement System, and whether programs are still expected to comply with that and to conduct all of the assessments associated with it.
Yep. Absolutely. We are working right now to understand how we can alleviate the burden of QRIS 1.0, knowing that we're moving to QRIS 2.0, as I mentioned, through our strategic planning. And so while we absolutely want you to continue the activities, you'll want to talk to your QRIS implementation manager and implementation liaison to make sure that you know what resources you should be devoting to quality improvement. And if you have any trouble submitting documents and or ensuring that the bureaucracy is met, that we're trying to alleviate as much of that as possible to ensure that you aren't spending time checking boxes for QRIS 1.0 when we know we're moving to QRIS 2.0. I want to also highlight that all of you who have a QRIS rating and have been working, we will actively be making sure that that experience and that rating is valued and part of our next QRIS operations. So don't worry, and any effort and energy you put into your QRIS and quality improvement will absolutely be validated in the next QRIS iteration that we'll be working on together the year ahead.
Great, thank you. There is a question about groupings and whether there is a maximum grouping size with the release of the fall requirements.
Absolutely. Going in the fall requirements, we have, I want to highlight actually that and a couple other changes that are in the requirements for the playbook. The grouping size, we have eliminated restrictions on the groupings. And so you are free to go back to your pre-COVID licensing capacity, provided that you can meet the requirements, the operational requirements necessary to prevent COVID transmission. So making sure you still have the adequate space in your classrooms to keep children at a reasonable distance. There are some accommodations we've been able to make for programs that can have reasonable strategies, but haven't been able to accommodate the 42 square feet for children. You want to work with your regional office to help understand how you can make sure you're meeting the operational requirements along the way. But in that, we have eliminated any group size restrictions so that you can look at your own space and look at your own configuration and decide how many kids you are able to serve within the confines of your programmatic capacity. So when you look at that, we will not add any additional restrictions, but we do want to make sure that you have the adequate space to do health checks, to do those health screenings, to do the health checks at the beginning of the day, and to make sure that that children have the adequate space to play and be in your facility without being on top of each other. In addition, there is still a need for us not to commingle groups. So you will need to keep the groups distinct, and that is important. And we see from all of the COVID transmission research out there that is the way that we prevent COVID transmission in our sites. So we know this is hard. And I know that the business model you all grapple with in trying to navigate the year ahead is going to have to change. And we want you to know we're here to support you and provide any flexibility you can, but to keep in mind those principles of COVID transmission, that we are trying to minimize close contacts and ensure that any close contacts have the sufficient space to make sure that we minimize transmission when contacts occur. The other things I wanted to reference in the standards that were updated, that we know we went to an email, was that the mask requirement. We know that we want that we know that all of the research coming out about COVID says that wearing a mask helps prevent transmission. And so in line with the governor's executive order and with DESE's rules and all other rules, we are asking that you adults do wear masks in the building, in our facilities. That said, we know that children, while we want to recommend that children wear masks, there are many different developmental, social, emotional, and sensory issues that prevent children from wearing masks. And so we know that you may need to be flexible and continue to reiterate that you and your families need to work together on what you are comfortable with for rules around masks with children in your buildings.
Thank you, Commissioner. There are questions about the final letter or final approval to open and how that's working right now.
Absolutely. So as we know that many of you are deciding how to configure your space in the year ahead and to be the best partners possible with your communities, that we needed to provide some flexibility to you and ensure that that you were not only abiding by your plans, but be able to reconfigure your space, do renewals or do expansions or license expansions that would help us make sure that we are giving you the flexibility you need. And so for two reasons, we've worked to make sure that we aren't holding the 60-day requirement to the final approval, and instead allowing you to make any shifts and changes you need, focus on that, and focus our licensors' time on being able to accommodate those shifts. We still are working through the approvals and making sure that you have a plan in place that can keep you safe. But please don't worry about the 60-day timeline because we know many of you are also changing your configuration of your space that may change your plans. And we wanted to allow you to do that without the confines of having to go through an additional transaction or feel like we were being kept to a 60-day timeline. So over the course of the year, over the course of the fall, we will continue to approve those plans and make sure that they have all the details we need. We know that we have read many of them. We have many that have made the final approval, but we also wanted to release the new information, our expedited processes, and be able to make sure that as your school districts are making different decisions about their space and capacity, that you're able to be responsive without additional steps from us around the 60-day deadline. And so that is where we'll be going. And as we settle into the fall, we will ensure that we get you information on when you can expect the final approval after we've seen the licensing processes wrap up.
Thank you. I think this is our last question. Folks are asking about staffing and really trying to kind of make sure that they are able to meet family needs. Do you have any words of advice or thoughts about just the general reopening and preparing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know I can't tell you how many times I heard traveling around the state prior to COVID, the desperate need you all had for qualified workforce that would be able, the classrooms you couldn't open because you didn't have enough teachers, the family childcare providers that couldn't take the additional children because they didn't have assistants to be able to provide services. And so when we look for, when we've been looking at the COVID environment, we're seeing that just exacerbated, and we have tried as much as we can to provide flexibility in our teacher qualification processes to make sure that you have the resources you need to try to be able to recruit and sustain staff. We know it's still a challenge. A couple of things I want to highlight on this is clarifying some of our policies on teacher assistants and co-op and practicum students. If you do have a practicum student or a student teacher that is in the building, or a co-op teacher, you absolutely can use them in your classroom as part of your ratio if they meet the appropriate qualifications. We just need them to stay stable with the same group. So for those of you who maybe formerly gave practicum teachers a variety of experience by going to classroom, that won't be allowed this year, but we do want you to be able to use them in your ratio and make sure that you are able to use them as staff as long as they can stay in a stable group. In addition, We have a lot of school districts that have suggested that they have employees that might be able to partner with our childcare in temporary situations. So to asking your municipality or school district of creative ways you might be able to think about staffing buildings that are serving particularly those students in remote learning situations. Aside from that, we know that this is a desperate need across the country, and I can't tell you how many of my administrators from other states and I have spent time together lamenting the fact that we have not been able to fix the workforce issues before COVID, and now they seem more critical than ever. This is why I started with tonight. While we're looking at how we address the COVID crisis and the staffing needed, in addition, we also know that every step we take has to be towards building a stronger ladder to building a better pipeline of educators to make sure that we not only retain people in the field, but we attract people to the field along the way, and making sure that those people are not only ready and willing, but trained and supported to meet these services. And this time, more than ever, we know how hard that is. Again, I just can't tell you how hard as I watch the reality and read the incidence reports and talk to programs and providers and directors and teachers and educators, the very nuanced situations you're grappling with every day. And our role as a state is to try to provide as much flexibility to help you make those good decisions and sustain and support your workforce. I want to highlight that we have mental health consultation grants that are available for those of you who need strategies to deal with stressful times in your buildings and facilities. We also have professional development centers around the state, and our playbook includes contacts for those. They are able to serve any providers that have a need to either have an ongoing professional learning community that might meet 6 or 8 times to brainstorm around critical areas, but also those that might just need a one-on-one coffee to problem solve your staffing issues or hear strategies that other programs have used. And so please do take advantage of those. We know that many of you have turned to them to help with staffing models or staffing scenarios, and we know how happy and they are to be useful during this time. So please do continue to rely on them. And if you do have in your specific community, in your specific pipeline of educators, please do turn to their consultation to try to brainstorm ways that you might be able to recruit and sustain educators. And if there is flexibility you need from us, don't hesitate to ask. As a former educator myself, I do have to say it is a mixed bag to try to reduce the qualifications needed for teachers, because we know how critical this work is and how critical the training is. But we also know how critical adequate supervision and staffing is in the classroom. So keep that in mind and really think as we take these steps forward, how you can make sure you have enough staff and how ways that we can help you support that staff to make sure they can make it not only through the year, but sustain our field overall as we build back better. And with that, with the last question, I want to just reiterate, this is definitively not the conversation I thought we'd be having as I hit my 1-year mark in this role. But I am just blown away by the remarkable passion, dedication, tenacity of this field, and ability to not only support each other, support families and children, but also be the voice that the stakeholders need to hear about the critical value you're adding to the community. So thank you for continuing being that voice, not only with EEC, but with all the leadership to make sure that they have the understanding of the hard work you do every day. I am so honored to be in this role, as crazy as this moment in time is, and to be working with all of you and to be navigating what feels like the most uncharted territory we could imagine, with such a passionate, dedicated cadre of colleagues that it will help make sure that we have the resources families and children and our communities need as we come to the other side of this tumultuous year. So thank you. Thank you not only for being here tonight, but for your continued involvement as we continue to strategize around all of the really, really critical issues that you keep bringing up to us. We know that these aren't decisions we only need to make for today. They're decisions we need to make that bring us to the future of childcare, of the early education and care field, and for all of you that children and families rely on every day to thrive. So thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for your partnership and collaboration. And thank you in advance for all the work we'll do together over the year ahead. Have a great evening.